Welcome to episode 86 of the Camerosity Podcast, the world's second highest rated film photography podcast, as ranked by feedspot.com. We're excited to bring to you an episode straight from the Camerosity suggestion box, an episode entirely about adapting lenses. One of the best parts of this hobby is picking up old vintage lenses and seeing what you can get from them when used on modern high megapixel digital cameras or modern state-of-the-art film cameras. Adapting lenses has proven to be one of the more exciting parts of collecting cameras. Before we get started, let's do some introductions. From Sydney, Australia, the land of the cheap aluminium, is Mr. Theo Panagopoulos. Hey Theo, since you can't find a Snyder 35, have you ever adapted any Nikon lenses to anything modern?
Yeah, pretty much everything, especially Micro Four Thirds, which tends to be my digital, but Nikon lenses are adaptable to almost anything because of their long flange distance.
Next, from Gainesville, Florida, is Mr. Anthony Root. Hey Anthony, have you ever seen anyone adapt the Nikonos underwater lens to an above-water digital camera?
Yeah, the 35, the 85, yes, but nothing else. They're just, unless you just want it to look like a funhouse mirror, it doesn't really work.
Finally, from Yellow Springs, Ohio, is Mr. Paul Rybo. Hey Paul, how many Micro Four Thirds adapters do you have?
Not as many as you have, Mike.
I have 2 whole boxes still.
I know you do. I sold today a 45mm f2.8 lens that came off of a Petrie point-and-shoot camera adapted to Micro Four Thirds.
All right, we have a bunch of people in the waiting room, so let's let them in. All right, we have a full house. We have a lot of returning guests. We have 1 or 2 people that haven't been on the show before. We'll go around the room real quick. I see Pat Casey, hello. Miles Libak, Stephen Strangeways, Ray Nason, Will Pinkham, Patrick Rapps, AJ. I see a very special guest, Mr. David Jentz is here. Hey, David, it's been a long time since we've talked.
Yeah, just a few minutes.
David's our resident retina expert, so we'll be interested to see what you may have to add. We're going to do an episode about adapting lenses. Alyssa?
Hey, everybody. Nope, Alyssa Micha.
Micha, okay, sorry. I couldn't say your last name. Do you want to introduce yourself? First-time caller?
Yes, this is my first time, and Will Pinkham, my friend, recommended that I join. So
awesome. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
I think that's everybody. Rollin. I'm sorry, I don't know your last name. Banderob. You're from the Discord server. You post a lot there.
I posted a couple of times there on the Facebook
awesome.
recently.
Well, welcome. So we're doing a show. This is one that we put out a request for, just topics that people wanted us to discuss, and adapting lenses has been proven to be pretty popular. Obviously, you can adapt pretty much anything to anything these days. There was a time when there were only established adapters made by the manufacturers of cameras. You know, Miranda would make an adapter that would work for Miranda cameras. But as the Chinese manufacturers opened up their imports, tons and tons of, third-party adapters were made. The world of 3D printing has further opened it up even more to where you can just envision something and create it yourself. I've seen some completely bizarro adaptions. I know Theo's got one he wants to show us too, which is very absurd.
Yeah, don't forget duct tape.
Duct tape, yeah. I mean, you pretty much, as long as you can keep erroneous light from messing up the image, you could pretty much use whatever you can. I've seen people use a potato. I think there was a guy on YouTube once that used a potato or something. But I just wanted to, kind of throw it out there and see what some of you guys do. What are some of your favorite adaptions? Obviously, people are going to be excited to hear about some of the more bizarre ones. In the promo for this episode, one of the images I used was the Olympus Pen digital, and I have an Argus Centaur lens. This is from a pre-war Argus. And the adapter, it's a Ramir rare adapter from eBay. He makes a lot of kind of one-off adapters like that too from eBay. And I had always heard that the Centaur lenses were very good performers, and I've always liked the images that I've gotten from my Argus bricks, but this was the first time I ever had a chance to see what these things could do digitally. And I chose a pre-war one, so it's not coated, so it does tend to flare a little bit more and have a little bit of reduced in contrast, but it does as good of a job as I had hoped. I would like to adapt this to a full frame camera to see the edges and see how good it does there too. But enough about me. I mean, we have a lot of people here. I'd love to start with maybe some of the people we don't hear from as frequently. Alyssa, since you're our first time caller, we don't have any kind of like theme music to play for first time callers, but why don't you give us a little background on some of the stuff that you like to play with?
Sure, yeah. I'm actually just kind of now dabbling in trying to adapt some SLR lenses to a Graflex Crown graphic special. And so looking at maybe 3D printing a lens board and attaching some kind of adapter to it. But in the past, I've adapted those lenses onto my Bolex 16 millimeter film camera and actually had some really good success with that. And that was just with an adapter that I found on eBay.
Going straight to the Graflex adapters, that's you've already elevated yourself, so Will gets a higher commission for referring you. Thanks, Will.
That's a high bar for us to follow.
Yeah,
now,
it is.
isn't
Right. Yeah. That's great. Yeah, Patrick just showing. Looks like is that an Aero Ektar?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an Aero Ektar. I find that the Graflex is the universal adapter because I've got a photo deox back that I put on here. I can put my 5D on it, and I shoot all kinds of crazy stuff through it digitally.
So, Alyssa, you said SLR lenses. Are you thinking 35 millimeter SLRs or like Pentax 6.7 or something?
I was thinking 35.
Okay.
Just because I have a bunch of them around and,
So I did that 20, 30 years ago, and you're going to have a really hard time focusing past 5 feet. For macro and close-up work, it's going to work fine, obviously using a ground glass, but there's not enough image circle coming out of those lenses to fill the frame unless you're really extending the bellows out as far as possible.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
You'll get some cool circle, like orb pictures, almost like they're from a fisheye, but it won't be fisheye. But there's some, I mean, you'd be surprised that some lenses are really good at a lot more coverage than you would think, but then sometimes they don't. So
aren't the Minolta lenses known for having a much bigger image circle?
Not that much larger though, Theo.
Not that much larger. Okay.
And they typically the perspective control lenses, like the 35 Nikkor, has a larger image circle than the 28. A lot of people shoot the 35 on X-Pan format cameras.
It's not 35 millimeter, but a lens you should add to your wish list is the Schneider Angulon 90 millimeter f6.8 lens. That is a very popular lens for people who like to do panoramics because the image circle on it, it's already a wide angle lens to begin with. So if you put that on like a 4x5 Graflex, you're going to get super wide. I don't know that it'll completely cover 4x5, but it should do a lot of it. And that's a real good one for, like I said, panoramics because it has such a huge image circle.
Have you actually tried any yet, Alyssa?
No, I'm interested in it. I saw someone on a large format photography group that I'm in on Facebook. I saw somebody experimenting with it, and they were getting some really cool results. And I was thinking, well, I have a bunch of lenses, and I have a Graflex, and I have a friend, Will, who is going to help me adapt those.
So since we have Stephen here, and I know Stephen is a wealth of this kind of information, Stephen, can you explain at a high level flange distance and how that's going to impact like what Ray said when you talk about focusing to infinity, why you can't put a lot of like a rangefinder lens on a Nikon F or something along those lines. Let's start there so we could kind of have a baseline for which lenses work best for which systems.
It really just starts with the way a lens is designed, that if you've got a system where the lens mount of the camera is, say, 46 millimeters from the film plane or the sensor, that's where lenses for that system are designed to focus to infinity. So you have to match that. And if you end up with something that is a much longer adapter and puts the lens further away from the film plane or the sensor of a digital camera, then you're just going to get close-up focusing. You're going to get a macro lens, basically. So mirrorless cameras are really great for adapting lenses because their native lens mount is very close to the sensor. You've got a lot of room to build an adapter and do things that way. With something like the Graflex, you're going to run into the same issue that the lenses originally made for that system are meant to sit very far from the film plane, and a lens made for a 35 millimeter SLR camera is meant to sit quite a bit closer. So there are actually lens boards that were designed back in the day that would inset a lens closer to the film plane, so that rather than just being a flat board, it actually had an almost a cone that would allow the lens to mount further deeper into the camera. And something like that might allow a lens like that to focus to infinity. But with all these things, the main thing I suggest is to just start by holding the lens up to the camera. Just retract the bellows all the way, don't have an adapter on a camera, if you're doing something with that, and just hold the lens up to your camera, move it forward and back, and see if you can get that point where it will focus to infinity. And that's really the start of where you're going to be kind of measuring what you are going to need to do to adapt something.
Awesome. Thank you for this suggestion.
That's a good tip for anything. If you're not actually taking the image, you could just, I always call it free lensing, just holding that lens up in space to kind of give yourself an idea of the coverage and such like that and what you're going to do, with the obvious caveat of, if you're talking about a modern digital camera and you're just holding the lens up there to not let dust get on the sensor, that's obviously not an issue for a Graflex camera, but just something to consider too. Nick Marshall, you just joined. Hello. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Nick Marshall. I think I've been on the podcast a couple times before, ages ago, maybe Mamiya and Graflex episodes. But yeah, I haven't got into the adapted lenses too much. Actually, I a little bit late getting into the podcast because I was trying to set up my Helios 44 onto my mirrorless camera right now. So I'm out of focus background and everything.
Which Helios 44?
Oh, it's a 44M, which is pretty cheap, common one I got ages ago to use on like Pentax cameras. Yes, M42 mount. So I don't know if M42 is pretty much, you can adapt that to, obviously Pentax and most other, mirrorless, anything except for Nikon, which has a longer flange focal distance.
Nick, you need to go get some Christmas lights and hang them on that wall behind you so we could see some swirly.
If I had another hour.
Just kidding. All right, that's cool. David, I'm gonna call you out here too. Do you do any like shooting of old lenses on modern cameras? We never really got a chance to talk about what you shoot now.
Well, I shoot Nikon DSLRs like D800, but I have tried adapters. Compur made the DKL mount that's used by several cameras, including Retina Reflex S3 and 4, and the Instamatic Reflex. And I agree 100% with Stephen. It is pretty difficult to get these. They have these adapters for Nikon that they sell on eBay from multiple different companies. I've tried 4 or 5 of them. And particularly the wide-angle lenses, you can't get them to focus to infinity to save your rear end. So I was glad to hear Stephen say, because I've just acquired a Z6 Nikon, mirrorless, that if somebody comes up with a DKL adapter for mirrorless, I'd love to know about it, because I would love to be able to shoot these Retina Xenon and Retina Heligon, what we call S-mount, DKL retina mount lenses on something digital to evaluate them. So that's my only experience with it, and it matches what Steven says. It's very difficult to get an adapter where your DKL lens does focus to infinity. You can do all kinds of close-up work, but knowing how that thing performs at infinity is near impossible.
David, it'll work fine on any mirrorless. On your Z camera, if you get a Z to DKL adapter, it will.
I do have that. Try that.
Perfect. It'll work fine.
Okay, I'm going to try that tonight.
The only thing it won't work on an SLR, on a DSLR like your D800s.
No.
The flange distance is just too far.
Okay.
I'll give you a piece of advice. The DKL mount, the adapters can be problematic.
Big time.
It's not. Sometimes the lens won't come off.
Oh.
They're very fiddly because of what the linkage is like on those lenses. It's different, and buy the best you can find. KNF is a good brand. Photodiox is a good brand.
Yeah, I have a Photodiox mount.
Photodiox should work fine.
So put that on my F to Z mount that I already have to use my other Nikons on the Z6 is what you're saying.
That would work.
Yeah.
If the adapter you had was made properly, that could be an issue as well.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of the DKL adapters, and I don't know if they do this on purpose. They actually focus beyond infinity a little bit. So they allow you to dial in infinity perfect, but then that comes at the expense of minimum focus. So sometimes you can only minimum focus to about 4 to 5 feet on those. It's like you get almost the opposite problem. But I've never, ever I've used a DKL mount on Fuji X mount. I've used them on Sony E mount. David, I'm a huge fan of the Z6. I have the Z5, but they're very, very similar cameras. And speaking to what Steven said earlier, Steven, am I right that the Nikon Z mount has the narrowest distance, right? It's even narrower than Sony?
Yeah, it's the smallest flange depth, and it's also a very large diameter mount. So there's a lot of room to put an adapter and a lens on. The other major advantage is that the stack of optical glass in front of the sensor is very thin on Nikon Z cameras. And you said evaluating those lenses, that one of the biggest things I think people miss out on is that lenses that were meant for film cameras would hit a perfectly flat piece of film. But when you're dealing with digital cameras, they have glass in front of the sensors. They have low pass filters. They have IR and UV filters. They have, in the case of Nikon Z, it's about 1 millimeter. Other manufacturers are closer to 2 millimeters. Micro Four Thirds is 4 millimeters. And what you'll run into is that greatly affects image quality, especially in the corners, especially wide angle lenses, and especially lenses made for rangefinders where the lens is very close to the film plane or the digital sensor. So absolutely, it's a great way to evaluate how those lenses will perform on a Nikon Z camera, to use them on a Nikon Z camera. Just bear in mind that does not in any way reflect how they would have performed on film or how they'll perform on like a Sony or Canon camera that have a different sensor stack.
Okay, much appreciated. Thank you.
But Stephen, does that matter so much when you're using a crop sensor though? Because obviously, if you're starting to get the edge quality sort of falling away, like on a Micro Four Thirds, you're literally just using the middle of the lens, aren't you?
You are, but you're also affecting a lot of other things like spherical aberration, and it's actually surprising how incredibly awful it can be for certain lenses and certain lens designs that, and there are ways around it, but you can get color shifts, you can get blurry edges, and, lenses all the way up to 50 millimeters in focal length in some cases, but especially on ultra wides.
You mentioned, before we go on, you mentioned Ramir before. Some of those lens adapters he makes are amazing, because I've got in the metal ones he made out of metal. I'm not sure if he's still making out of metal or if he's 3D printing them these days. But I had one made for a M40 mount Biotar with the 17 blades for the Micro Four Thirds, and the quality of that adapter is just phenomenal. It's actually almost as heavy as the camera itself, but it locks in, and you can really use a lens on a very unique mount that doesn't get used much at all anywhere else.
Ramir is probably this guy he's a wizard at what he does. But as far as the workmanship, there was a Chinese company called Yinan, and I'm not sure they're still around, but they made adapters for various odd lenses. This is an adapter for a Contaflex 126 lens. It's a 45 millimeter 2.8 Tessar, and it has a helical built into it, so that the lens itself didn't have focusing. It was built into the body on that camera. So Yinan made the adapter to adapt it from the Contaflex 126 to L39. And then from L39, I put the Leica M adapter on it, so I adapt it to the M10 Leica.
The Argus adapter, this is a Ramir lens adapter too. It's all metal, like Theo was saying, but it's got 3 screws in the back. It's actually 2 pieces. And I didn't run into this problem. Mine seemed to be dialed in pretty perfectly, but from what I understand, some of the Argus lenses don't line up perfectly at infinity. So he made these where I could move these screws and I can adjust and calibrate infinity by a little bit too. So like he put a lot of thought into this. I didn't buy this firsthand, so I don't know how much these are, but he does a very good job. I think his quality is quite good.
He's not cheap.
Yeah.
The Altix adapters he makes are the same. They actually have a set screw on them. So you can get it to infinity, focus the lens to infinity, and then you move the adapter in and out until it lines up, and then lock it down. One of the interesting lenses that a lot of people like to adapt now are the Nikon S and the Contax rangefinder lenses. And there are a number of different adapters that you can buy for them. There are some that are made in the Ukraine from old recycled Russian Kievs. They actually work okay until they don't.
They don't work okay at all, Paul.
Well, I didn't want
Just
to
don't
say
touch
that.
them. They work fine.
The nice thing to do if you're going to use one of them, make sure there's something really well padded directly underneath the camera that you're holding.
So when
Because
it falls
sooner or
off.
later it's going to come off.
So real quick though, in regards to Nikon rangefinder lenses, if you're looking to adapt their wide angle or telephoto lenses, those use the external bayonet. They don't use the focusing helicoid that the Nikon rangefinders, the Contax has had. You can buy Nikon S mount, just the external bayonet. So if you have one of my all-time favorite lenses of any system is the 35 millimeter f2.5 lens that was on the rangefinders. That's actually the exact same formulation that's on the Nikonos. That is an amazing lens. The 1.8 is good too. It's just a lot more expensive. But like if you have a 35 or a 28, or you want to shoot the 85, the 85 f2 is an amazing short telephoto lens. If you want to adapt those to digital, you can get just the external bayonet, and that's cheap. You can find those for 20, 25 bucks. But if you want to do the 50 millimeters, like what Paul's talking about, where you do need to have the internal bayonet, yeah, he's holding up. Is that an Amadeo?
This is an Amadeo.
Yeah.
And the Amadeo has both the internal and the external
Right.
mount. This is a public service announcement. I started to do this, and I was a Fuji user. So I bought the Fuji adapter for the Contax and Nikon S mount lenses. And then I got Sony. So then I had to buy a Sony adapter.
Let's see where this is going.
If I had bought a Leica adapter to start with, you stick the Contax lens or Nikon S lens on this. It's internal and external. And then it's adapted to Leica M, which goes on to anything. So
Which allows you to buy a new Fuji.
it allows you to buy anything you want. I mean, because a Nikon mount or a Leica M mount is basically adaptable to any mirrorless camera. That's why I have $750 worth of adapters when I should have $250 worth of adapters.
Yeah, they're $250 a piece, but they are the highest quality. I mean, as good, if maybe even better than the original mounts. I mean, they are very nice.
So the Chinese adapters are getting pretty good now. I have one that I was going to bring to the last show and show to Paul, and I misplaced it in my cabinet of things that I'm not going to sell. So we have another show coming up in Cincinnati, and I hope to be able to bring it, but it was under $100. I was blown away at the quality. I was blown away with the coupling, internal and external mount, for $100. So
it has a focusing helicoid.
It has a focusing helicoid, yes, and it's actually silky smooth.
And what mounts do they make it for?
I only purchased it for S to Leica M.
Okay.
Because of
right.
I shoot Fuji and Sony and Nikon and Canon and Olympus and Panasonic and Hasselblad and Mamiya, so it'll adapt that'll adapt to everything.
It'll adapt to anything that you want to adapt it to.
I live vicariously through you, Paul, through your mistakes.
We could talk more about this later, but I mean, we might as well mention it now. What's it, March 22nd, Paul, is the Cincinnati show?
Right. Cincinnati.
So Ray's going to be there. I'm going to do my very best to be there too. We are really pulling his arm and twisting his ankles, but I'm trying to drag Dan Tamarkin to come down too. And we may, even if the stars align, have one of our other Camerosity hosts, Anthony. Is it still on the cards to fly up to Cincy? He's given us a thumbs up. So we may, we're working on Theo, but understandably, it'd be a long air flight. But we may have 3/4 of
the Camerosity corporate budget doesn't quite extend that.
Yeah, I know. Right? We had to make some painful cuts. Yeah, we may. I'm not going to have a big table like I did last year, but I will certainly be there. Paul will have a table. Anthony's going to come. We'll try to see if we could get as many people to come and maybe buy some stuff, or at the very minimum, talk to us. So if any of you guys listening are on this show, it's still a month and a couple weeks away. You guys can maybe make your plans and maybe visit us.
Yeah, and Ray will be there, and with a little luck, you'll bring his wife because she's
the CFO is coming.
All right, great. Yeah. They're great.
Maybe the dog as well. We'll see.
Yeah, and it's always fun because you'll hear somebody say, "Ray, do you really need that? Ray, don't you have one of those?" And none of us have ever heard our wives say that.
We don't understand that.
So the past couple of weeks, I've been sorting out the most current purchases that I've made the past year or so, and I took over one of my spare bedrooms doing this. And she's walking in, she's going, and I'm sorting through boxes and boxes. I've gone through 1,000 cameras so far. And I now pretty much, I think I hold the record of King Regulus, 2Ds and 3Ds.
We're going to have to do that King Regular episode after a while.
Yeah.
Oh, I bought a regular special today. Oh God,
I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, it's wild looking. It's wild.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll post it when it comes.
Take a look at it.
It's one of the
All right.
expensive ones.
Well, so speaking of some goofy lenses, Paul do you still have the Angenieux lens there?
I took it downstairs.
You took it downstairs?
I have and David helped me with this because I wasn't sure where it came from. It is a Kodak 45 millimeter 3.5 lens that's badged Angenieux.
Yes.
And I thought I knew what it was, and David confirmed that it came off of probably a Retinette F.
Yeah, it would either one of two models. This would be from the 1950s to late 50s. So there were two versions of what was called the Retinette F Type 022/7. It's from the second version, or the exact same lens and shutter was used on the next model, which would have been Retinette F Type 030/7. The Retinettes were, the bodies were manufactured in Germany, sent to France. The lenses and shutters were installed in France by, of all things, a company that made portable phonographs. Okay.
Huh.
You can't, history's odder than you can ever believe. Anyway, so that's it. But yeah, I recognize the lens immediately, and it's one of those two Retinette Fs, either the 022/7 or the 030/7.
Is there a way to tell the difference between the two?
No, well, unfortunately, there's no serial number data for these particular Angenieux lenses. They were triplets. They didn't honor a serial number, and I have no idea of serial number data from the French shutter maker. So just from the outside look, they virtually appear identical. Both are, I believe this lens is 45 millimeter focal length, right?
That's correct.
Yes,
45-35.
Yeah, and that would only been used on the 022 and the 030/7 because the 035 then went to a faster Angenieux lens, which was 2.8, and it was also a slightly longer focal length, if I remember correctly. I think it was 50 instead of 45. So one of those two cameras is where it came from.
Well, this one was adapted. Of course, it had a helicoid put on it, so it does focus. And it's adapted to L39, which is perfect for me because now I can use it on the Leicas or basically anything that I want to that has the ability to focus it. I couldn't use it on a film camera very easily because there would be no cam. But for a mirrorless camera, it works perfect. And it's actually a very nice lens. It's one of the better small lenses of that type that I've experimented with.
There are some outstanding 3-element triplet lenses that went on Retinetta cameras. An example, there was a Rodenstock Reomar that was on Retinette 1B, both versions, and it was based on the same lens that Zeiss Econ used, called a Pantar lens. They had a Pantar lens system, and I have seen some very fine black and white photography from amateurs who are still shooting these things, these Retinettas. Believe it or not, I get a lot of questions from those people, and it's usually by supplying them manuals so they understand how to operate these cameras. They're a little quirky.
The Pantars were excellent lenses. That was one of the standard lenses on the Cotaflex camera.
Yeah,
and they were very nice lenses and easily adapted. I mean, they're not expensive, and they're a lot of bang for the buck.
Yeah,
the cost of the adapter is probably greater than the cost of the lens itself, but they're a lot of fun to play with.
Is that lens permanently mounted to the adapter?
Yes. Well, yeah, it's probably not permanently adapted to the L39 part, but it is permanently adapted to the helicoid.
Okay, gotcha.
One of the things you'll find in that when you're ready to adapt lenses, if a lot of lenses did not have focusing helicoids in the lens itself, lenses that came off of other cameras that would have had focusing in the body, they would not have that ability. So what you do is find like a 28 to 56 millimeter ring tube that has focusing. And somebody on the Facebook page had a great suggestion: pick up the Vivitar 2X macro converter and take the glass out of it. That was Ray. Yeah, that's just a great, because those are really well made, and they have a long throw. So with a 50 millimeter lens, you should be able to focus 1-to-1 with any lens that you can get adapted to the front end of it.
There's another manufacturer, RAF, and I think he's in Ukraine, who makes a bunch of different adapters. I started buying his adapters to put projection lenses on the GFX and the Hasselblad, and these fast aperture lenses. I have a 170 f1.7, no aperture, no focusing, and I have mounts for all my cameras that have a helicoil, and they produce wonderful images in the circle, but the edges are just all smudged out and circled out like a really, really crazy. There's been a really big push on these projection lenses that the values have just gone out of sight. There's so many on eBay now coming out of Europe. Crazy, but there are adapters and there are different lengths and different. He's basically a machine shop that manufactures parts to cobble lenses together.
Patrick, what did you just hold up?
He was talking about projector lenses. It's a Buell.
There it is.
Yeah.
Buell is Buell, and another one that's really, really good is Navitar.
Navitar's, yeah.
Yeah, Navitars were Tamron.
This is a 177.8 millimeter 2.5.
And I want to point out too, just this might be obvious, but for me at least, the reason that adapting lenses is so fun is to see those imperfections, right? Like if I want to see a razor sharp digital perfect, everything's exactly sterile, then I don't need that that's not the reason you do this. So I love seeing the soft edges and the imperfections, and Nick, when he gets that Helios on his webcam to do some swirly bokeh, that's the fun part to me. I like the vignetting, so the more imperfect the lenses, in my opinion, the more ideal for me it is to adapt. Because I like I said, if I want a perfectly sterile picture, I'll just get a brand new lens and it's going to look great.
There is an exception there. I've seen people adapt on the Fuji GFX 100, whatever the other letter is, camera with an adapter, the best lenses in the world, the Mamiya 7. And basically what they do is this adapter actually opens up, because it's obviously a leaf shutter, opens up the shutter and they shoot. And these lenses were, all jokes aside about best cameras, etc., these lenses were at the pinnacle of lens design during that period. So the results they're actually getting through that GFX is just astounding. The problem is the adapter is about $1,200. So it's way up there in terms of being able to do that, and that's on top of buying a camera that's probably $5,000 or $6,000 to start with. So
I shoot GFX, and there's so many other lenses unless you already have the lenses, but the adapter being that so cost prohibitive. I have adapters with my Hasselblad lenses on it, which are today's Fuji lenses are, except for being sterile, they are phenomenal. There you go, Paul.
I shoot the Hasselblad lens on the Sony.
There you go. But there is an argument to actually put these really good lenses on there, but it's for a different purpose. I'm with Mike though. Generally, when you're playing around with them and putting on adapters onto digital cameras, for what we generally do here, it's the imperfections which make the photos interesting. Otherwise, just shoot a digital camera.
Yeah, to Mike's point, I just posted on the Facebook page a Frankenstein adaptation. I mean, the cheapest adapter in the world is gaffer's tape and a zip tie on a really old Rodenstock Recta A Plainat 280. I don't know, but I posted an example picture up, and it's all swirly and blurry around the edges of it when you use it on a full 4x5 sheet of film.
That was a weird picture, Patrick, because the sharp point was at different places in the image. I mean, it was almost like the film wasn't flat, which I know is not the case.
It was a test picture, and I thought it was kind of cool. It's a pretty lens. I mean, I've got no idea how old it actually is, but Rodenstock Recta A Plainat.
No, I have no idea what that is. I mean, that's, but there are a lot. I've seen people, it isn't just projector lenses. I've seen people adapt lenses from copy machines.
I've done
the
that.
old Xerox machines.
Enlarging lenses. Don't forget those.
What are they?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Enlarging lenses. Well, that goes back a long way. Nikon made
EL
an EL to F adapter.
Yep.
Which was great it was for use on the bellows, of course, because you had no focusing on the lens itself. But the EL to F adapter, I sold tons of those things, and they were great for macro work.
Aren't the EL lenses really good if you like to digitize film with a digital camera?
Yes.
Yeah, that's exactly. Digitizing is exactly. And speaking of helical focusing, I'm Micro Four Thirds. I was trying to do it on the cheap, and I found this little doodad from the 50s, I think.
Is that an Acura?
You are correct. You are correct.
I had one in my hands this morning. I have one for exact amount.
You know something? It does the trick. It's again not as nicely made as you might hope, but I've got these. I haven't made an optical print in decades, so I've got these wonderful L Nicors, and I've got an Apo Rotagon here, and I had a great big digitizing project, and I was trying to do it on the cheap, and it worked wonderfully. Now I have since picked up. Again, I'm Micro Four Thirds. This is Olympus. I picked up a bellows. I don't think anyone makes these anymore, or maybe they do. But for a digitizing project, the focusing mount, enlarging lens mounted backwards, perfect.
Yeah, the copier lenses are usually, a lot of them are the Xerox are ranked Taylor Hobson.
Mm-hmm.
That's a f4.5 on the older copiers. They had really nice lenses. Now these are dead sharp.
One thing I'll say is you can get into a lot of fun with adapting lenses with Micro Four Thirds because of the very small flange depth. And one of the things that I have found is that there are these really cheap Chinese M42 to M42 helicoids. So these give you focusing, and they make these in several different thicknesses. You can get them from AliExpress, from eBay, and you can adapt M42 to anything to M42. Like I've got L39 to M42. And I had an adapter that was M42 to Micro Four Thirds, and it was the proper distance. It was 40 some odd millimeters to get an M42 lens to infinity. And I was trying to adapt an enlarger lens, but it was too far away from the film plane when I added a helicoid to give me focusing. And then I found this crazy little adapter, and what this is this is C and M42 to Micro Four Thirds. So this has an inner C mount thread and it has an outer M42 thread, but it's very thin. It's a couple of millimeters thick. So it would take an M42 lens, a normal camera M42 lens, way past infinity. But in this case, it gives me enough room to stick one of those helicoids in and adapt this crazy enlarger lens.
That a C mount. This is speaking of Taylor, this is a Taylor from a 16 millimeter movie camera. And since Micro Four Thirds format isn't that much bigger than 16 millimeter, this works nicely.
I think I've mentioned a few times on the podcast around putting pen lenses onto Micro Four Thirds. I've also got an adapter here for robot lenses. So they're like a perfect nice little size for Micro Four Thirds, and have a lot of fun with those. But if you really want to go properly with Micro Four Thirds, you can't not do this. is where
oh boy!
If you don't put a Mamiya press lens onto a Micro Four Thirds camera, you're an amateur.
What is it, like is that like a 20-to-1 crop ratio or something like that?
Yeah, something like that. I've got one for Pentacon 6 as well. I've got to thank Mike for sending those adapters out for me. But but interesting enough, I mean, Mike, I don't know if you remember the results I posted in our chat a while back in terms of what you get.
Quite good.
They're absolutely amazing, actually. So, but yes, it's not really your street camera scene that you want to take out with.
What was the focal length of the Mamiya lens?
That's a 65.
This one's 65. Yeah. But I do have the 100 as well. So
well, you're only using the center part of the lens.
Yeah.
Yes. But it does look ridiculous though, doesn't it? Because the actual lens and adapter are bigger than the camera, including adding a viewfinder to it.
That's a great lens to take on holiday. You'd scare people away, for sure.
Yeah. Interesting enough, what you do have to do is you have to actually trigger the shutter in bulb mode to use it, because obviously these are leaf shutters on the Mamiya. But when you put the Pentacon 6 on, it's a different story. And the adapter itself is actually even longer on that one. And it just the whole thing's just so weight.
Front heavy.
The weight is at the front. Yeah, front heavy. Yeah. It's just ridiculous.
So I figured at some point we would probably go around the room and have people share what is their wackiest adaptation that they have either on hand or maybe that they have good experience with. Paul, you've shared a couple different cool ones too. And you talked in a recent episode about removing the lenses from Yashica Electra 35s for adaptation. And those, once you get them out, they're really nice too.
They are good. The pad of death on the Electro 35s, usually they're just not worth fixing. I mean, the cost to repair them is too much, and it's a simple enough matter to take the lens off and then use the helicoid that you were just talking about to put a focusing mount on it. The only key is to make sure you lock the aperture, cut some wires so that the aperture is still usable.
We have to keep the shutter open too, like Theo said.
Yeah. The wackiest that I've done so far, I shoot Leica M10Rs, and Leicas are not, rangefinder cameras don't work well with any kind of telephoto lens because you're seeing such a small area inside. But when Leica came out with the M10R, they gave you a live view as well as an electronic viewfinder, which opened up the possibility of using this 400 millimeter f5 pellet lens that Leica made to use with the VisiFlex. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a VisiFlex, but a VisiFlex was an adapter that Leica made to allow you to use long telephoto lenses on a rangefinder camera and see through the lens using a mirror. Seeing someone use that is very, very similar to watching a monkey having sex with a football. It's just an ugly, ugly experience for everybody concerned. But the lens actually works great on this. It's adapted. It's a VisiFlex to Leica R, and then adapted from Leica R to Leica M. Focuses to infinity. It's 400 millimeter. It's heavy as can be, but it works great. The other one that's odd is, I showed this earlier, this is a Hasselblad lens on a Sony camera. And the only reason that I did this is because the lens is also a tilt shift lens. You can shift the lens right and left. So what I do is use it to make panoramas. I'll take a 3 image and stitch them together and make panoramas. Because of the Hasselblad lens, the coverage on it is so much greater than the 24 by 36 sensor in the body. It gives you the ability to make a huge 125 megabyte file.
It's been 10, 20 episodes ago, but you had spoken about the Nikkor perspective correction lenses, how you do like pseudo panoramas with those too.
Yeah, same concept. The 28 millimeter, 35 millimeter Nikon PC lenses.
You do 3 images where you do left, center, and then flip the thing upside down.
Yep.
You do the right.
And Theo's done some too with that lens.
I have done. Funny story though, remembering Paul, is that I mentioned that I did it on my DSLR, and you kind of went, "Oh yeah, I've used it on everything else except the actual cameras it was designed to be used on."
I've never tried it on the Nikon. I have a D800E. I've never tried it on it, but there are only a few that will, because the trick is that the coverage of the lens has to be greater than the 35 millimeter frame. The Leica PA Kurtagon is a 35 millimeter lens for the R camera. It will cover it. Both of the Nikon PC lenses will cover it, but there aren't a lot more that will. It's not something that the shift will work with.
That might be a good one for Alyssa to look out for, is the perspective correction, the PC Nikkor lenses. There's a 35 millimeter and a 28 millimeter.
Right, and those will go. They're not expensive at all, but they will cover at least 2.5 inches. 2.5 inches horizontally.
The 35 has a wider image circle, wider coverage.
It does. Okay. All right. So the 35 would be a better choice than the 28 to adapt.
Probably cheaper too.
Yeah. And that's the one I used, and the results were really good. I actually, if you look on Photo Thinking, you'll see an article about it, because the results were that good that I quickly posted it up into an article, because it's a good, easy way to get some panoramics, and it's not very labor intensive either.
No.
No, it's just one click of a button. Select 3 images on Lightroom, select 3 images and click the button that says merge. Mike, didn't you get one also?
You sold me or we traded or something the 35-8.
Yeah.
I haven't used it yet. It's on my list. Lightroom can do it if you're a fan. I do Photoshop CC, and they call the feature photo merge. You just open the 3 images, click next, wait 30 seconds, and boom, you got your image.
Just for people thinking about this though, just we're warning those PC lenses don't have linkages back to the camera. So if you do use them on their native Nikons, it's like using an adapted camera anyway, because you have to preset your aperture and all the other bits because they move around so much. I'm assuming that they just couldn't get the linkages through.
Yeah, they're a preset lens, so you're going to be on full manual exposure or aperture priority, but it is a little bit more, not quite as automated.
I didn't doubt you. I just had to look myself because I haven't used it. And you're right. Yeah, it doesn't couple with the pin.
Yeah, you stop down. You need to stop down meter.
It isn't a problem for me, but for someone who isn't used to that, it's just an extra step. But a lot of fun. Rollin, haven't heard much from you at the beginning. What are some of your adapting preferences, misadventures, or strange oddities?
The strangest oddity is the one I put on the Facebook page today, was where I adapted a Sony lens to a Leica, where everybody usually puts a Leica lens on a Sony.
Backwards. Okay.
So I had for a short while, I had the Sony STF lens, the 135, which is a manual focus lens. And so I adapted it to a Leica body and had some nice shots with it, and it was interesting.
Well, that was Sony A mount, wasn't it, Rollin?
Yes.
It was
it was for the alpha mount.
Yeah.
Correct.
So that was a Minolta mount, it was a Minolta lens. Sony Minolta mount.
It was one of the lenses that Sony kept from Minolta and just rebadged for the short while there, and very unique lens.
It's very unique and very hard to find. But I saw your results were really fun. I mean, that was a lot of cool stuff.
So that, and the other one is then I went to crop sensor Sony's, but I was doing a while back. I was doing a little bit of events here and there. So I visited Johnny called Johnny over at Central Camera and got an Olympus 135 2.8. So I would have a 200 2.8 equivalent on my crop sensor, just for practicality. And I was smart enough then to get an Olympus to M mount and then M to Sony. Keep it simple for that. I have a couple questions about adapters, but go ahead and finish going around.
Go ahead.
No, go around.
All right. Will, how you doing?
All right. How are you? I haven't adapted too much. I have a micro four thirds. I have a really old micro four thirds camera. And then I got the Pentax Q. That was my plan, to adapt things to that and see what fun I could have. And one of the lenses I had is this JVC television camera lens, I guess. And it was C mount.
No. Yep.
So I thought I would try it out. It's a zoom lens. It didn't seem to do too much. So I don't know, further experimentation with that. And then just this weekend, I found this really cool, it's a Schneider Radionar in a thrift shop for like $8. And it just seemed really neat. So I came home. It's for the Aquarel.
Okay.
So kind of figuring that out, whether I can do it. I think something's wrong with the focusing. I think maybe the stop or the pin is snapped off because it will just unthread all the way. So I got to figure that out. But it's kind of a neat lens.
The Aquarels, didn't they have something that screwed down on the outside?
Yeah.
The lens went in,
and then the mount around it screwed down. Yes.
And that's what locked it in place.
Right. So it's like you described it perfectly. It's almost like a breech mount, like on a Canon FD, but instead of a bayonet, it's still a screw mount. So there's a pin at the top dead center. You see that notch, and you have to align that little notch to a pin on the body. So once the lens is on, you can't move the lens, but there's a ring closest to the body that you have to tighten it down. It's definitely a unique mount.
Will was saying that the focusing helical comes apart.
I don't think it's supposed to, but
Well,
It's not supposed to.
yeah, well, in a perfect world.
Yeah. But as long as you don't go too far, it won't fall off.
Yeah.
But of course, I also went down the rabbit hole of then trying to find a Acrel or Acroret to buy and play with that as well. They're kind of cool looking.
Yeah, they're cool.
And this is the 75.
That's cool. It might be worth you sourcing a camera for that.
Yeah, yeah, and they're not very expensive. I looked up a couple, and all the ones I looked at weren't very expensive and came with the 50.
They only made, so it was an interchangeable lens system, and those only two focal lengths they made were 50 and 75. So when you see, ignore the meter I have on mine, but the two windows, that's not a rangefinder. That's two separate viewfinders. Mm-hmm. And not all of them have this feature, but when I move this little lever up and down, it opens and closes one of the two windows. Oh, nice. So you have essentially both in the camera, even though it looks like it's a rangefinder. Huh. If I had another Acrel, I'd offer it to you, but there's the only one I have, and it works perfectly. So I'm not willing to let the good working one go.
So it's not a rangefinder, so it's zone focus, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it, like I said, it looks, people see these and see the two viewfinders in the back, and it looks like, oh, that must be a rangefinder. It's not. Another camera that was like that was the Paxette. The Braun Paxettes look like they're range. I mean, they did eventually make a rangefinder Paxette, but the early ones, the ones that show up on eBay frequently, they are the same way. There's two windows. Actually, in some of them, one was an extinction meter, but then they made another one which was a dual viewfinder, but those weren't rangefinders either. But you mentioned, Will, the Pentax Q, which I have a bunch of them, and this one is a Kern Paillard. I guess it's a Bolex lens. It's a C mount. And we briefly talked about this before on the show, but the crop factor is almost 1-to-1. It's a little bit off, but it's pretty damn close. And this is really the only digital camera system where you could mount these C mount lenses and get close to the original focal length of what the lens was designed to do. Cool. A lot of fun.
The Pentax Q is also perfect for D mount, which is even smaller than C mount. C mount was often for 16mm cameras, and D mount was often for 8mm cameras. And the only adapter I've been able to find is Pentax Q. So I've got this little Olympus Cine Zuiko from a Sankyo camera. It was a Sankyo Super 8 camera that used Olympus lenses, or Sankyo lenses. There were a whole bunch of different options. And it's on a itty-bitty tiny little D mount adapter. So it's even thinner and smaller threads than your typical C-mount adapter.
You got the watermelon body there, the green and pink.
Yep.
I got green and blue and pink. I don't have green and pink, though. These things are fun, but I will say this, and I have to caution anybody wanting to run out to get a Pentax Q camera. While it seems like it's a lot of fun to use those C or D lenses on them, this is a EVF-only camera, and the resolution on the screen is quite low. It doesn't compare to like current generation digital cameras. So seeing focus on that screen is quite difficult. At least it is for me. So I remember when I first got a couple of these and I was super excited to go out and try and shoot them. And the experience for me wasn't that great. Like it does have focus peaking, but it doesn't work as well as I'm used to on like the Z5 or the Sony Alphas. I don't know if you have any tips, Stephen.
Yeah, that's there is a zoom in feature, so you can zoom in and punch in to see focus a little bit better and using peaking, but that's about it. At least I will say they are better than the Nikon 1 cameras, because I was super excited about those being a 1-inch sensor, but they don't do exposure simulation. So if you're shooting in manual mode and you've set an aperture on an adapted lens, it looks like you're going to get a perfectly exposed photograph, and you take the picture and it's either way too bright or way too dark. So you have to adjust the aperture, take another photo, and do this sort of trial and error, because there is no meter display and there is no exposure simulation on the Nikon 1 cameras, which to me, those would have been perfect for adapting strange, odd lenses to, but they really just did not design the cameras to work well with that at all.
On the Nikon 1, you have exposure display with their lenses, with the AF lenses.
Yeah, yes.
With electronic linkage.
Yes.
But with no adapted lenses, you have nothing. And what you're saying is the biggest advantage to me, aside from the lens selection of a mirrorless camera, is the ability to have what you see is what you get. I mean, it's truly WYSIWYG, because it's going to preview exposure, white balance, add exposure. You know, I shoot everything on manual exposure. I don't pay any attention at all anymore to the plus minus display that's that you always used with a film camera to line up to get your exposure set. I just eyeball it, and the quality is so good on the cameras that they're almost always perfect.
I mean, digital mirrorless has breathed such life into some of these older, especially the slower lenses. I have a Tessar 40 in M42 mount that I have to a Contax D, and it's dark. You know, when it's on the camera that it's supposed to be used, even in bright sunlight, the viewfinder has heavy vignetting. You stop it down even a little bit, and the viewfinder is so dark. But I mounted that thing to my Z5 and beautiful images. I mean, it just brought out what that lens was always capable of. And that's, I think, from a historical standpoint, something that impresses me so much is so many of these earlier, you know, the Aplanat lens that I think Will said he had, or I don't remember who said they had that one. Any of the old lenses, even the people who take like old Kodak vest pockets and they take the back off and literally mount the camera to a digital camera and shoot through the body, and you get the level of resolution and detail out of these lenses that just weren't possible back then. And to think that all this glass has been made from 50, 60, 70, 80, 100, even beyond that years ago, and we're now seeing what those lenses were capable of, is just, I think, super cool.
One of the things I wanted to point out was that when you're talking about adapting lenses to Leica M, there's actually an autofocus Leica M adapter that adapts Leica M to Sony E or Nikon Z, and it has autofocus because the adapter itself has a motor and has a helicoid and will move the lens in and out physically. So you can take, you know, a 100-year-old lens, adapt it to Leica M, put it on one of these adapters, and it will autofocus on your mirrorless camera. It's just wild.
I need to try and understand this. How is that actually working? I'm not doubting it's working, but how does that actually, is it the camera communicating back to that adapter to say this is in focus? Is that how it's doing it?
Yeah, essentially the adapter just presents itself as if it were an autofocus lens. And the way that it's set up to work is that when you have pressed the shutter release, the camera is telling the adapter to start moving the motor, and it starts moving, and it's looking for increasing contrast, or it's looking for the phase if you have a camera with phase detection autofocus. And then when it sees that it's in focus, it's telling the motor in the adapter to stop or to go back to that perfect focus point. And it works seamlessly, just like having an autofocus lens.
And Theo, the adapters are paper thin. It's just crazy how small they are, considering there's a motor in the adapter.
Okay. Yeah, they had an old version that had a big box hanging off the bottom of it.
Now
the newer models are just a thin little adapter, and it's almost like magic.
Is that Viltrox?
No, Technoc or Techart?
Tech Art. Tech Art. Yep, Tech Art.
What do they charge for those? I doubt that they're affordable.
They're under a couple $100. They're not too
that's
bad.
Interesting.
They really are not bad. It's kind of funny where Nikon was not allowing other manufacturers to manufacture their Z mount. Even the company that makes it for them. So they were marketing that adapter with their lenses the past year or so at a very discounted rate. Tamron was a company that basically was really pumping this adapter so they could put Nikon F mounts they already had in stock because they couldn't manufacture or couldn't sell a Z mount. That is somewhat has changed now, but you may not have known, but I'm in the photo industry. I was raised in the photo industry. I do work for the old Mamiya America Corporation. So my insight for a lot of these companies, the Tamron rep was a good old friend of mine, and you know we talk shop all the time about what's happening, what's the fade, what's the shortages, what's hot, what's on the push. Really interesting to have a lens manufacturer pick up a third party adapter. It makes a lot of sense in the world, though.
Well, when you say that they weren't licensed to make the Z mount, you'll recall the other major lens manufacturer that we won't name, but starts with an S.
Absolutely.
They bought lenses, took them apart, and retro-engineered them without licensing the mount.
They actually have an agreement now.
They do now, but they didn't back then. So when they made Canon EF mount lenses.
Yes. Oh, I know. I was.
And then the minute Canon did a firmware upgrade on the body, the lenses didn't work anymore.
Yep.
Oh, jeez.
I lived through that, Paul. I was working retail back then at a camera shop.
Has anybody ever used in the late 80s, Nikon made an autofocus teleconverter?
Yep. TC16A.
Yeah.
How did those work?
Whoa.
glacially.
They were slow. Yeah.
Put it this way: have you ever used a Nikon F4 or a N2020 film camera?
Yeah, it's a 2020 I have. Yes, not the
Half the
F4.
speed of that focusing.
Oh boy, even slower.
So it was painful, but
Yeah.
the converter did, and it wasn't as big as the first Tech Art converter, and optically they were pretty good.
Pentax did one as well, an autofocus teleconverter for their old manual focus lenses.
I have one of the lenses that is an autofocus lens for manual focus.
That was the MEF,
Pentax.
the MEF lens.
Yeah, the MEF lens. Yes.
There were also aftermarket lenses that would have built-in autofocus from Cosina and a couple other. Vivitar, I think, marketed some.
Power focus.
Power focus. Vivitar
Power focus. Yeah.
They had a series 1, I think, that was a power focus.
What's really funny is a lot of those lenses that were autofocus lenses for manual focus cameras had their built-in focus sensors in the lens. So they would focus based on the assumption that they'd be mounted on a camera body with a perfect flange distance. So what happens is if you get an adapter, as others have said, often these adapters are a little bit thin and they'll focus past infinity. And so if you put one of those autofocus lenses on an adapter that doesn't have the perfect flange distance, the lens will focus itself thinking it's in perfect focus, and it will be just a millimeter or so off every single time, and it won't work at all.
Just making art.
Just making art, yeah.
Making art.
Well, one of the things that's interesting about the mirrorless, to adapt to mirrorless, it's opened up a whole range of cool lenses. Everyone shoots, wide angles and 50s, but there are a pile of really nice 75 to 90 millimeter lenses that people didn't use because that wasn't a popular focal length on rangefinder cameras. But if you, for example, the one that got me started on all this was a 85 millimeter Steinhill Culminar and Leica thread mount. And that's just a beautiful lens. It's just beautifully balanced and it has great rendering, really good out of focus highlights, very cool lens. And the ones I like the least actually are the Leicas. I haven't found any of the Leicas that were really interesting to me. But some of the other German lenses were excellent.
I like the Steinheil Quinon lenses. Those are excellent.
Yeah.
I have one in Exacta mount and then another in Adixa M42 mount.
The 135, the 135s.
I have the 50. I have
55.
55. That's right. Yeah. I think I do have a 135. I can't remember because it's either that or 90. It might be a rangefinder lens. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there you go, Ray.
It's a 135 2.8 thing in my deck.
There you go. That's beautiful.
Cool lens.
Miles, we haven't heard from you yet. What do you got for us?
I use the Amadeo like M adapters pretty much weekly. And then just a couple of days ago, it's in the mail. I purchased a Canon F1 that had been converted to Contarex mount.
Oh, jeez.
What?
That's weird.
The lenses are cheap. Wow.
They found the one guy in the world who would buy that.
And I thought,
and that makes the lenses way more expensive.
and I thought this Ansco to Exacta was a weird one.
You shared that before. So I want to hear more about this Contarex adapter.
I'll put it in the chat if I can figure out how to do that. But it came up on the Camera Store website a couple days ago, and I did a little research, and it seems like there was someone in Hong Kong about 15 to 25 years ago who was converting all of the variants of the Canon F1 to Contarex.
Why?
The lenses are awesome, for one.
The lenses
they're great
are
lenses.
incredible.
So Miles is sharing with us images. The first one is a top-down shot of a black F1. Okay, the second one.
With the aperture, because there's no aperture in the lens, in the body. That is awesome.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited because there are, you can, if you want, you can get a Contarex serviced.
Yeah, Alan Wade.
Alan Wade will do it.
Oh,
but if you want, maybe a little newer body or a little smaller, something lighter, this is available.
So what are you going to put on a planar? Or what do you have that?
I've ordered the 85 sonar. That's really the only lens I'm interested in the system.
Miles, the only problem with them is that I hope you have better luck than I've had.
Separation.
Element separation is. I've got one downstairs right now that is almost 100% element separation on it.
Is it enough to affect the image? Is that separation?
Oh yeah, it's
usually it's
yeah. If it's just around the edges,
yeah.
It's not, but when it reaches the point where you're over 50%, it will affect the image quality.
Yeah. I've had a couple of the Contax mount sonars, the 50 ones that have had some, and the effect is like minimal on some of them I've had. And I think at this point, if they haven't separated, might be lucky. We'll see.
It would be very obvious if you've seen photos of the front element. Very, very
Yeah.
obvious.
It looks like there's a rainbow oil slick on it. If anybody's ever if you ever look for the Contaflex auxiliary lenses, almost always, they call them the Pro Tessars. Those almost always separate. The lenses for the 126 Rollin, the Instamatic SLR, a lot of times have separation. There's something about the glue. I don't know if that's the Canadian balsam problem or something else.
No, in the late 50s, Zeiss switched to a UV glue, and it has its prone to separation. And the problem is it's not as fixable as Canada balsam because it requires much higher temperatures to separate and re-cement.
I gotcha.
So like with older lenses, you can still get them
fixed,
but with the UV ones, it's, to my understanding, almost impossible.
Well, I am eagerly awaiting your thoughts on the Contarex, not adapted, modified Canon F1. That is something I definitely did not have on my bingo card for tonight.
No, that's really totally unique. Ray, who was it John Van Steenberg, Focal Point in Colorado?
Yeah.
Was I think the last guy in the U.S. who would re-cement lenses, and he retired maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
It was either him or was it photography on Bald Mountain?
No, that was Ken Ruth.
Ken Ruth.
Yes.
Yeah, no, Focal Point he only did lenses, and he only did re-gluing, re-cementing elements. Ken Huff did it also on large format lenses and maybe on some smaller stuff too, but he sold all of his equipment. To re-glue, it's not a very safe process. You have to...
Well, plus the alignment of the optic, it has to be basically refocused.
And to get it apart, you have to heat it to a certain temperature that is right at the point where it's going to damage the lens. In order to get the old glue, get the elements apart. So there's really not anyone, I don't believe there's anyone left in the U.S. who's doing it.
That's ambitious. So my strange adaptation is, I thought I could find something that you guys haven't seen before. This is a DAG lens. This is a Color Minotaur from a Minox 35 that he took the lens off and turned it into like a thread mount lens. And I have it mounted to a Corfield Paraflex. And the Paraflexes I've reviewed before are really, really neat cameras because, as the name suggests, there's like a periscope in there. There's this tiny little reflex mirror that drops down right in front of the shutter and allows you to see through the top of the camera. Well, on some of them, it's the back, but the older ones, it was the top. And you could actually see like a piece of ground glass. Now, it's only a tiny square, so it only does like the middle of the image. But like you said earlier, Paul, long telephoto lenses are difficult to use on rangefinders because it's just so hard to see that. With this, you can at least focus on any lens. So the Minotaur is a 35 millimeters, so like slightly wide. With this thing on here, you could easily focus it. You don't have to worry about whether or not it's calibrated to a rangefinder or anything like that, because there is no rangefinder on these cameras. Obviously, the viewfinder, you're not going to get your field of view for 35 millimeters, but you can kind of approximate that if you want to. But you could put even though the Paraflex did have its own lenses, you can put any rangefinder lens on these cameras and use the Paraflex to focus it correctly. And then either through some kind of auxiliary viewfinder or just use your imagination, you can compose images of any focal length on these cameras. And they turn out quite nice. And I've always had really good luck with the Minox 35 lenses because they're tiny but mighty. But if ever anybody wants to adapt Minox lenses, DAG, I don't know if he still sells them because he was doing it for a while, but he would sell these pre-converted to like a thread mount.
The other one that some people like to try to mess around with are the lenses for the Pentax 110, which are very, very tiny little lenses. They work fine, except you don't have any aperture. So there are no f-stops built into those lenses. So you can focus them, but you can't. You're shooting wide open basically all the time. they made a 70 millimeter 2.8 that was just a really, really nice lens, but it's a 2.8. So you've got to cut
Gonna
back
be
your
soft.
cut
Yeah.
back your f-stop as much as you can, and maybe put a neutral density or something on it.
So you can also build your own Waterhouse stop, essentially, like make a little aperture disc and install it in the back of the lens and use that. So if it's kind of soft and too bright at f2.8, you could, make a little circular washer or make something out of cardboard to give you essentially an f4 or f5.6 and just stick that in the back of the lens before you put it on the camera.
Yep. And Hong, our buddy Hong, he was cracking on the SEMA soft focus lens, which is basically a plastic tube with plastic elements that was designed to do close-ups and soft focus type stuff. And they had that. They came with a series of 3 discs that of different diameters, so you could cut back the aperture. Lens Baby also had those on their early.
The washer and a magnet. Yeah.
That's exactly right. What it was a washer and a magnet.
Did we get to everybody? Alyssa, I know you said you were doing the Graflex stuff, but have you done any other smaller formats, or do you have any digital mirrorlesses that you've used?
As far as adapting lenses, not so much. I'm just kind of now venturing into that. Although last year I did, I got I think it's a Photocopier adapter. It was like $15 to mount MD lenses on for C mount, and I put those on my Bolex reflex 16 millimeter film camera and shot a bunch of footage for a documentary that I was working on. And I was actually really surprised and pleased with the results. It was very successful.
Very cool.
That's really interesting. I mean, that people are going the other direction. You see a lot of C-mount lenses on mirrorless cameras, but to put a 35 millimeter lens on a Rex is a really interesting way to do it.
Yeah, and it actually, I mean, it worked really well. I got it off of Amazon. I think it's Photocopier.
Yeah,
Yep.
Photocopier.
FOTSAY. Photocopier.
Do you have a website or somewhere where you have the stuff that you've shot?
I mean, it's part of like an hour-long documentary, but
I gotcha. Okay.
I could
All right.
definitely post it to the Facebook group.
Sure. Why not?
So are you shooting directly to film?
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, and then the only other thing I've done is I've tried to make my Yashica Matte LM shoot macro photos. So I got some of those like magnifying filters that you can get and just kind of gaff taped it to the front of it. But the problem is that you don't know what you're focusing on because it's a TLR. So you're not like, yeah. So I had to do a couple tests to actually see what my focusing distance was. But then I got some cool results with that actually.
Well, the Yashica Matte, I think, uses the Bay 1 Rolly filters.
P25, yeah. It's just
They made a whole boatload of close-up adapters for the Rolleiflex, which should adapt to that camera. It should mount right to the front of it.
Oh, it doesn't have any threads or anything.
No,
so
it's
I'm not sure.
it's a bayonet.
Okay.
And it was a set of 2. Look for Bay 25, is the easiest way to buy them. They'll say Bay 25 and Acura and all kinds of people made them. There are 2 lenses. One is for the taking lens, one is for the viewing lens.
Alyssa, I don't have your exact one, but this is a Yashica 12. Can you see the bayonet around there?
Yes. Yep.
There's one for the viewing lens and then the one for the taking lens. And if you find ones for, like what Paul said, that are meant for close-ups, they would securely mount, and they're optically good, we'll say.
Yeah, because what I did was not optically good, but it was fun.
It corrects to a certain extent for the parallax too. I mean, it isn't 100% accurate for parallax, but it gets pretty close.
I remember the first time I shot a Mamiya, I don't know, a C330 or something with the bellows. I cranked those bellows out as far as they would go and completely forgot about parallax. And I got the tops of like every flower.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah.
Lots of this picture.
Yeah.
Mamiya made this cool little accessory called the Paramender, which fit in between the tripod and the camera, and it would just sit there. You'd compose your shot, and then when you're ready to shoot, you'd flip a lever, and it would raise the camera up the exact same distance as the difference between the viewing lens and the taking lens. So where the viewing lens was, the taking lens would move up into that exact perfect position, so you could frame everything up. And I think other TLR manufacturers made similar accessories.
Mm-hmm. The other thing you could do for focus, sometimes it was not easy to focus them, Like Ray said, you focus it with a ground glass or a piece of wax paper or anything that would let you focus it, and then put a piece of string on the bottom of the camera into the tripod socket and have the string be the proper distance to the subject. That's a simple way to do it too.
That's old school, Paul.
Yeah. When you were talking about the front mounted shutter, one of my customers was a lab that still a studio that still used hot lights for product photography, and they used his shutter was a ping pong paddle.
I believe it. I believe it.
1001, 1002. Put the paddle over, put the dark slide in, and go
F128 and be there, right?
Yeah.
Rollin, you said you had a couple other questions about adapters. You want to ask them?
Yeah, a couple questions about quality of adapters. So about 8-9 years ago, I was first getting M-mount lenses and adapting them to the Sonys. And at the time, I spent a whole lot of money on a used Novaflex adapter. How much did I pay for the made in Germany? Or, can you name adapters that you should avoid? Or maybe you want to name adapters that are quality. The other one I've got is a Kip-On. Just kind of wondering, am I paying a whole lot for nothing with the Novaflex, or is it worth it?
It's worth mentioning. The quality is not just in terms of how the tolerances are. I did get a Nikon F-mount adapter for the Micro Four Thirds once, and I stuck it on and couldn't for the life of me get this bloody thing off the lens. And I couldn't work out for ages what it was. And I did searches after searches and found out that the little pin that locks the lens in place was just too long on these adapters, and someone had hit the same problem. So when I finally did get it off by triggering that little pin, the answer was to actually just file back that pin. So I sat there with a file, filing this adapter back, and then cleaning it all up and putting it back onto my lens. So when you talk about the quality and the better name brand ones, there's definitely a lot more research going into the higher priced ones in terms of the quality that they actually produce. They're more usually more metal, made from metal rather than plastic. They have their tolerances tend to be a lot narrower, so that way you get exactly what you're trying to achieve, and you don't have silly things like getting them stuck on your lens, or worse still, falling off your camera, which I've seen in a couple of cases where you stick it on there and you think this does not look right, and then you just pull your hand away for a sec and the whole lens just falls out. Yeah, and you think, nah. It's worth paying the extra money because you spend a lot of money on your lenses and on your camera.
Well, and I agree with what you say, Theo, but I think there's a happy ground between the cost of the Kip-Ons and the Novaflexes. There are some good aftermarket. K&F is probably, to me, the best of the $30 to $50 adapters. They work quite well. Their tolerances are good. Some of the cheap ones that you'll see, and I have a lot of Photo-C adapters. I probably have in the house right now 60 adapters because I don't like to change them when I'm working. So I have a lot of adapters. The Photo-Cs are hit or miss. Some of them are very good. I have an Exacta right now that simply will not mount on any Exacta camera or any Exacta lens. It just won't go on. I have another one from the same brand that works fine.
My experience has been, to speak to what Paul's saying with the Exactas, anytime an adapter has a moving part, you want to get a better adapter, right? If you're talking the most basic, like Minolta MD to Sony E-mount, that's a solid piece of metal, no moving parts. The Photassis, the photodioxes are going to be fine.
The DKLs are always a problem. Always get the best DKL that you can buy. The other one, Nikon G, to use the Nikon G lenses, because the G lenses have no aperture on the lens itself.
Neither does the DKL.
And as a statement, I represent Novaflex in the US. So anything mechanical and manual, their adapters are the best, period, at any price point, at any tolerances, but they don't make electronic adapters. So if you ever wanted to need something that we're focusing or exposure to transfer aperture, it's not going to be a Novaflex adapter. It's going to be X, Y, or Z, if you would.
Rollin, are you in the US?
Yeah, I'm in Iowa.
Okay, so I hate to encourage people to abuse the Amazon return policy, but if you're going to get a couple of the cheaper ones, just try to put them on. And like what Theo said, if it doesn't feel right, don't use it. But I'm also, like Paul said, there's a happy ground. I don't think you need to go out and buy Amadeo adapters for literally everything you have.
So, yeah, the LTM adapters for M mount. So after I got a hold of one and it was scratching the mount of the camera. And so then I said, whoa, I'm not going to mess around with cheap ones. So I started looking for the original lights ones used. Is that overkill again? And the second part of that is I've heard someone said that there's two different lights adapters. Ones that allow the live view to work, and then and others that don't. Now on my current Leica bodies, all of my LTM adapters, they work the live view, so I haven't seen that. Is that only for certain models of the Leicas, or have you heard anything about that?
That happens quite regularly, Rollin, and I think it's not having the right adapter, the right focal length adapter. I go through that regularly with so like especially some of the like the Voigtlander LTM lenses that I adapted, but a Leica thread mount lens with a Leica M adapter should bring up live view when you turn the focus ring on at any time. If it's a Leica brand, it should work without any problem. As far as the wear on the back end of it, that's normal. That's just a plating wearing off and it goes to brass. The adapters are brass. When you see the loss of the paint or the coating, the plating, that's normal. Don't worry about that. It isn't going to get loose. Since you asked a question, another thing that a lot of people don't realize, those adapters regularly get stuck on bodies. If you put a thread mount camera into the Leica M adapter, put it in the body, you try to take the lens off, and what you find is the lens unscrews. The adapter doesn't come off. The Leica rear lens cap, Leica brand rear lens cap, has 3 little nubs on the back end of this lens cap. Those 3 nubs fit perfectly into the adapter that's stuck in your body. You put it in and twist it, and it comes right out. Most people don't realize what those nubs are for.
I didn't know that.
They're to release the lens.
Those Leica screw to M adapters aren't very expensive used. Obviously, they don't make them new any longer, but they're not very expensive.
They're running 70 plus now.
50 and the 35s are that's right, for 50 and 35. 90 and 135s are dirt cheap.
Yeah, I just talked somebody down to 40 on eBay for one, but generally, and then if you call up Dan,
he won't charge you 40. He'll charge you a lot more than that.
Just remember, they were hundreds of dollars a piece at one point.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. No, I didn't know that. So I have a rear cap, and it doesn't have the bounds.
No, you don't have the old one.
So that's what I wanted to distinguish. Yeah. I mean, there's an old cap versus a new cap. Okay.
Yeah, this one is the Lights Wetzlar, and you can see the nubs there.
Yeah, no, I see the nubs on yours, but I've looked at I heard you say that on another podcast, and I went looking at all my things. I'm like, what is he talking about?
Yours is a more modern cap. Yours is a more modern rear cap. So you want the old style.
But Paul, you'll sell one of those caps for about $500, won't you?
I happen to have in my eBay store right now a very good selection of those rear caps.
Come see us at the Cincinnati show.
Changing direction a little bit, I've recently bought a digital camera for my son who works for the local observatory here part-time while he's doing his PhD. And he's into telescopes, and he's got like one of those big white telescopes even at home now, which you can zoom in and see Saturn with all its rings and all that sort of stuff. A camera that sort of attaches to that telescope, and what it does is it takes 4K pictures, multiple 4K pictures, and combines them to actually produce a really good result. And it got me thinking, has anyone adapted regular digital cameras, not those specific ones, to telescopes? Because that's an area I've never really looked into.
Yeah, I'll tell you, after 25 years of astronomy, that's exactly what we do. I've got my buddy who I do my astronomy intro workshop for. He uses a Panasonic S5. I have all of my Sonys. We put them up all on telescopes.
Didn't they make a lot of telescopes with Nikon F mounts on the telescope?
Yes.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, The only true difference between a astrophotography sensor and our digital cameras is that our digital cameras are built in with the Bayer filter. An astronomy sensor is basically just a bare black and white filter. And to get the colors, what they do is they'll take 4 images, one in black and white, one in red, one in blue, and one in green, which ends up making for a lot of images. But that's how they bring it back to color.
Bit like a trichome type thing.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
You can even get really great results without using an interchangeable lens camera. That one way to do it is to take the lens off of a mirrorless or DSLR camera and attach that to the telescope. So that telescope is the only optics you have. But if you want to do high magnification stuff, one technique that works really well is using an eyepiece in the telescope and then getting a point and shoot camera that has a very small physical lens and just holding that, or there are clamps and mounts you can get to hold that lens up to the eyepiece and take a picture with the camera's built-in lens and the eyepiece and the telescope and do high magnification that way.
Which is what that camera I bought off Amazon does.
That's what we call digicamming. And it actually was used a lot with wildlife photography and spotting scopes. The problem with that is that those particular cameras, when you try to merge the optics on the camera with the optics in the telescope or in the spotting scope, you get a lot of distortion. And you lose a lot of detail and you lose a lot of contrast because they're not married together. When you use a telescope on a lens, an interchangeable lens system, it's a better light that you're getting, specifically for astronomy too, because don't forget astronomy, we're capturing very, very, very dim light, so we need as much light as possible. When using a telescope that's not a mirror system, you're getting the best light of a 3 or 4 element lens, basically, so there's less distortions. It's doable. I'm not saying it's not doable. It's just it's not the quality that you would get with a telescope that actually enlarges to that magnification.
Right. Okay. I can see why those ones that I got him, it basically clamps onto the view,
Yes.
the view piece, and it's basically a digital camera with no lens on it at all. It's directly onto the sensor. So okay, that makes sense.
And that's a really great way to start. Like there are definitely cheap ways to get into and get started, but before long you'll end up with something that's a cooled sensor and a very dedicated astro camera.
Oh, look, he will, because I mean he's already starting to look at collecting telescopes and looking, okay, this is going to go further.
Well, but though, a telescope is just another lens,
Yeah,
so hey.
Absolutely. Just if I could just partake really quick, as far as lenses, I'm just picked up a Helios. This is an M40 with most of my adapters are the KF concept and the I just had it in my hands just seconds ago, which actually, Mike, I just realized I have an M39 Fotga adapter, so I'm going to try using my Instar. I've got a Industar 22 red 50 millimeter. I got to try that on the Sony and see what that's going to give me.
The Industar 22 is an excellent lens. That's
and I also have. We were we were talking about contacts. I've got a Zeiss Planar 1.4 50 millimeter.
But that's Contact's SLR, right? That you just held up.
Yes. Sorry,
not rangefinder.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, this is an SLR.
Okay, I mean you're right. It's still Contacts, but when you said Contacts and I didn't see a rangefinder lens, you're blowing my mind there. No, the KNF concept. I think Paul, you mentioned them. They're they're right in the middle. They are good.
Yeah,
they're not the most expensive, but they're good.
The other thing they do is the inside of the adapters are all really well anodized.
Yes.
Some of the cheaper ones are not well anodized. The stuff flakes off. It gets stuck on your sensor, or it causes flaring. Rollin, if you PM me your mailing address, I happen to have an extra one of these. I'll mail to you. It's my pleasure.
One of the really obscure things I'll say about accuracy of adapters is that in most cases it doesn't matter. If you've got an old lens where the focusing mechanism is unit focusing, all the elements in the lens move together, then having an adapter that's slightly the wrong size, usually a little bit too thin, isn't really going to matter. You'll lose a little bit of close focusing distance, but no big deal. Where it can make a bit of a difference is lenses that have floating elements. So some lenses, when you focus them closer, certain elements inside would move at a different rate, or wouldn't move at all while other elements were moving, and this was to improve image quality at close focusing. So if you have a perfectly matched adapter and you focus your lens to 50 centimeters, the optical configuration inside the lens is optimized for 50 centimeters. But if your adapter is too thin and you're now at a different distance, then the lens isn't perfectly optimized for that close-up distance. So in most cases, it doesn't really matter. It's very nitpicky, but it is one thing that a lens like that, I would personally want to have a really accurate NovaFlex adapter that gave me perfect infinity for infinity and gave the optimum close-up performance for the lenses that have that kind of floating element design.
Which lenses would have that floating element design?
They were really coming into the 1970s, and different companies had different names for them: CRC, close range correction, things like that, floating elements. In some cases, it was advertised in print material. In some cases, you kind of got to do some digging. But if you find out you've got a lens like that and you really want to be picky about getting the best image quality, an accurate adapter can make a difference.
The RB67 lenses, when they got to the K/L lens range, they also had floating elements. I mean, I'm not sure you want to adapt one of those to a Micro Four Thirds. They also have floating elements, and it drives some people batty trying to figure out how to use them, because they're going, but I'm focused. Why am I still adjusting something else? And it's an interesting concept.
I think the best takeaway from this whole discussion is there's about as many reasons to adapt a lens as there might be as lenses out there. As we've seen what Alyssa's doing with the large format, doing C-mount lenses on Pentax Q sensors, Mamiya press cameras on Micro Four Thirds, adapting photocopier lenses, telescopes, floating elements, Retina Angenieux lenses, stuff that just wasn't meant to go together. It's the ultimate Reese's peanut butter cup, right? You're meshing two things together and getting wonderful results. You can go for the intentional, distorted, weird, projector lens where multiple pieces of the same image are in focus and others aren't. You could go for crazy bokeh. People we didn't even get into flipping elements around to intentionally get weird, artifacts and such like that too. But it's just so much fun. And another thing I want to point out too is you can go to Central Camera in Chicago or any old camera store that has a parts bin, and I guarantee you they have a box somewhere of a bunch of JCPenney lenses, or the millions of Japanese third-party lenses that were made over the years, and they might be $10-20. You could get those things with an adapter, play with it on your digital camera, and probably get some pretty fantastic results from them. So while I am very eager to hear about Miles's Contour X lenses on his Canon F1, don't think you need to go that crazy, because those Contour X lenses are pricey. You don't need to get a Leica M Summachar or Summilux to get good results. You can get good results from practically anything that was ever made, and just do with it what you think is fun for you and you enjoy it. And when you're done with it, just try something else. There's so many options. This is usually the point in the show where I preview what the next episode is going to be about. But I was just kind of thinking, David, since you're here, would you be interested in maybe coming back for a Kodak Retina episode for the next show?
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
So this is going to be episode 86, adapting lenses, but we're going to be getting ready to do a Retina episode with David. Hopefully we can go over some good discussion about the history, some of the other cameras that Kodak made in Germany and Stuttgart at that time. So look out for the show announcement for that. We have a couple other great topics that we're hoping to get to in the next few episodes after that. We got episode 90 coming up in a couple months. So cameras of the 90s. We did our cameras of the 80s at 80 and 70s at 70s. So I don't know how many more decades it'd be worth going to, because
90s, Mamiya 7.
Mamiya 7, yes. Theo's favorite camera.
Finally.
Finally. If we ever get to episode 120, we may have to do cameras of the 2020s, and that's not going to be too interesting. So
I remember one time last year, Mike, you were talking about doing something on large format.
We have been talking about that for about as long as we've been talking about a King Regular episode. And well, no, I'll tell you, that's one of the ones we have on the agenda. And I have thrown the gauntlet down for these other guys, because I have Zero experience with. Alyssa can probably come back, and she's already more qualified to talk about it than I am. So we will 100% do a large format episode when we can commit to it and get some people on to talk. So AJ, you could host. I'll tell you what, you could be an honorary host for that episode.
Oh, jeez.
Can we define what large format means at this point before we open the can of worms up?
It's probably as wide as adapting lenses, to be honest with you.
4x5.
4x5 and up.
Minimum.
I agree with Paul.
2x3, 3x4.
We could do ULF. Let's do ULF.
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 Yeah, ULF.
We'll do banquet cameras. Banquet cameras would be a great subject.
I don't know if any of you guys know Jason Lane, but I thought that would be a good idea for someone, maybe because he makes the plates. I know that's enabled a ton of people to shoot some large format with his glass plate. So I think he could be a great guest. I just don't know him. So it's sometimes hard for me to reach out to people if I don't actually have a relationship with them. So that is definitely on the docket. We have some other ideas for upcoming shows coming. So as usual, the topics and discussion on the Camerosity podcast are determined, influenced, and demanded by you all. We love having as many new people, film photographers, new and old. Don't think you have to have the level of camera nerdiness as us here. We love people who are just getting started. The questions that you guys bring up are what make this show as great as it is. So I want to thank everybody for coming. David, thank you for coming on the show. We look forward to hearing more about retinas in the next episode.
Thank you.
Stephen, as always, you're a fountain of information. I love having you on. All you guys, AJ, we didn't need you to look anything up on eBay this time, so
okay,
that's good.
I was checking anyways.
Yeah, and like we said earlier, we're going to be at the Cincinnati Camera Show. It's in Westchester. It's on Saturday, March 22nd. We'll probably keep mentioning that on the next few episodes too. I will be there unless something comes up. Anthony had to drop. He's going to fly in from Florida. Obviously, Paul will be there, and I'm still working on Dan Tamarkin to come down with me, because Dan's in Chicago, about 45 minutes from where I'm at, so we could carpool together.
And those who are adventurous, Mike, the following day it's a similar show in Cleveland, Ohio.
In Cleveland, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Smaller show, but
does Igor go to the Cleveland show?
He goes to both, yes.
He does go to both. Okay, sweet. All right, thank you guys. Everybody have a great night.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
What's up, everybody? Today I'm going to share my top 5 reasons I like to use old adapted lenses. The first reason I like to adapt these lenses is the cost. If you follow my channel at all, you know that I've been able to find some real bargains at my thrift stores, but you can find deals online as well. And these old lenses a lot of times come in for fractions of what the modern lenses cost. Now, the next reason is the build quality, and unfortunately they just don't make lenses like they used to. Now, most of the lenses back in the day were made of metal. They gave you this nice tactile focusing ring, and they had an aperture ring, which is a premium feature today. Now, next up are those authentic retro looks that these lenses sport. There's a lot of companies out there today trying to recreate that film age look, but these lenses already have that cool look because they're actually from the film age. Now, next is mount freedom. And wouldn't it be nice if there was a universal mount that all camera bodies and lenses shared so we can mix and match however we wanted? Well, with the dawn of adapters, we really have that now. And these vintage lenses are particularly easy to adapt because all the focusing and aperture controls are on the outside of the lens. Finally, guys, these old lenses make for fantastic teachers. If you want to be enrolled in a photography 101 class, slap one of these lenses on the front of your camera. You'll have to learn to manually focus, set the aperture, set the shutter speed. It's a great way to get you to start thinking about the images you're creating.